The morning light streamed through the airport windows as Patricia Miller joined the line at security. At 68, she had the routine down to a science. Shoes off, laptop out, liquids in a clear bag. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times before, though not so much in recent years. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her clothes were practical, navy slacks and a light blue button-up shirt that had seen better days but was comfortable for the long flight ahead. "Next," called the TSA agent, barely looking up as Patricia handed over her ID and boarding pass. The agent glanced between the photo and her face, then back again. Something made him pause. "Thank you for your service," he said quietly, handing back her military retiree ID. Patricia nodded with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Long time ago now. She gathered her belongings on the other side of the scanner and slipped her worn leather loafers back on. The terminal stretched before her, filled with the usual chaos of a major airport on a Tuesday morning. Business people with their eyes glued to phones, families herding tired children, airline staff moving purposefully through the crowd. Gate 36 was at the far end of the terminal. Patricia walked steadily, her carry-on rolling behind her. She didn't rush. These days, she always gave herself plenty of time, a habit formed over decades of precision timing when minutes and seconds could make all the difference. At the gate, the boarding area was already filling up. Patricia found a seat near the window where she could watch the ground crew prep the aircraft. There was something comforting about the choreographed movements, each person knowing exactly what to do. The massive jet looked ready to go, fueled and waiting. She checked her watch. Still 40 minutes until boarding. From her bag, she pulled out a paperback with a dog-eared corner. It was a historical novel about early aviators, something her granddaughter had sent her last month. "Thought you might like this one, Grandma," the note had said. The girl had no idea how much Patricia already knew about those pioneering days of flight. "Is this seat taken?" A man in his 30s gestured to the chair beside her. "All yours," Patricia replied, shifting her bag to make more room. The man sat heavily, sighing as he placed his briefcase between his feet. "Third flight this week," he offered, though Patricia hadn't asked. "I'm starting to feel like I live in these terminals." Patricia nodded politely. "They do start to look the same after a while." "You fly often?" he asked, taking in her comfortable but unfashionable travel outfit. "Not anymore," she said. "Used to." Something in her tone must have discouraged further questions because he turned his attention to his phone. Patricia returned to her book, though her eyes occasionally drifted to the aircraft outside. The pilots had arrived, walking around the plane in their pre-flight check. Their movements brought back memories. Different aircraft, different uniforms, but the same careful attention to detail. The boarding announcement came over the loudspeaker, and Patricia closed her book. She waited as first class and priority members filed through the gate. There was no rush. Her seat would be there. When her group was called, she joined the line, boarding pass ready. The gate agent smiled mechanically as she scanned it. "Enjoy your flight to San Diego, ma'am." The jetway stretched before her, that familiar tunnel between worlds. Patricia had always thought of flying as a kind of magic, stepping into a tube in one city and emerging in another, the space between compressed into hours instead of days or weeks. Even after all these years, that sense of wonder had never quite left her. The flight attendant at the door greeted her with the same practiced smile they gave everyone. Patricia nodded and turned right, making her way down the aisle. The overhead bins were already filling up, passengers struggling to fit carry-ons designed to push the very limits of the airline's size restrictions. Seat 20D was an aisle seat in the middle section. Patricia preferred window seats, but she'd booked late, and this was what was available. She stored her small carry-on beneath the seat in front of her and settled in, buckling her seatbelt out of decades of habit more than immediate necessity. To her left sat an elderly couple, already deep in conversation about their upcoming visit with their new grandchild. To her right across the aisle, a young woman with headphones was lost in whatever played on her screen. Patricia pulled out her book again but didn't open it right away. Instead, she watched the final passengers board, observing their faces, their body language, the little tells of experienced travelers versus nervous flyers. The flight attendants moved efficiently through their pre-flight duties, checking seatbelts, ensuring bags were properly stowed, closing overhead bins. Their routine was different from what Patricia had known in her day, but the purpose remained the same. Safety first, comfort second. Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, came the captain's voice over the intercom. This is Captain Reynolds speaking. On behalf of the entire crew, welcome aboard Flight 1482 to San Diego. Our flight time today will be approximately 5 hours and 20 minutes. We're expecting some clear skies for the majority of our journey, though the weather report shows we might encounter some turbulence over the Rockies. Nothing to worry about. Just keep those seatbelts fastened when you're seated. Patricia listened to the familiar cadence of the announcements. The captain sounded young to her ears, probably in his 40s. She wondered briefly about his background, his training, his flight hours. Old habits died hard. As the safety demonstration began, Patricia found herself mouthing the words silently along with the flight attendant. Emergency exits, oxygen masks, life vests. The script hadn't changed much in 50 years. She watched as most passengers ignored the demonstration, focused instead on phones or magazines or conversations. She never did. Not once in all her years of flying had she ever ignored a safety briefing. She knew better than most how important those instructions could be. The pushback from the gate was smooth. The engine's distant rumble felt more than heard inside the cabin. Patricia's hand instinctively moved to the armrest, her body remembering sensations from thousands of takeoffs, though most of those had been experienced very differently from seat 20D. As they taxied toward the runway, Patricia finally opened her book. Though her attention wasn't fully on the words, part of her was still tuned to the sounds of the aircraft, the feel of its movements, the subtle cues that told her everything was proceeding normally. Most passengers noticed only when something felt wrong. Patricia noticed because everything felt right. The engines powered up for takeoff, and the familiar pressure pushed her gently back against her seat. The subtle vibrations, the acceleration, the moment when the wheels left the ground, all of it registered in her body like an old song she knew by heart. They climbed steadily through scattered clouds, the plane banking slightly as it turned on course. Patricia looked up from her book as the seatbelt sign dinged off. She remained buckled anyway. Another habit from a lifetime of understanding that the skies could turn unpredictable in moments. The flight attendants began their service preparations, moving through the cabin with practiced efficiency. "Would you like something to drink once service starts?" the elderly man next to her asked, his manner friendly. "Just water for me, thanks," Patricia replied with a smile. "I'm Patricia." "Harold," he said, "and this is my wife, June. We're heading out to meet our newest grandchild. Born 3 weeks ago, but we couldn't get away until now." "Congratulations," Patricia said warmly. "Boy or girl?" "A little girl," June answered, leaning forward to join the conversation. "Our 5th grandchild, but the first girl. Our son is completely wrapped around her tiny finger already." Patricia smiled, thinking of her own grandchildren. They have a way of doing that. "Do you have grandchildren?" June asked. "2," Patricia replied. "Both in college now. Hard to believe how fast the time goes." "Isn't that the truth?" Harold agreed. "You heading to San Diego for vacation?" "Visiting my sister," Patricia said. "She's having some health issues, and I promised I'd come stay with her for a few weeks while she recovers from surgery." The conversation flowed easily, the kind of pleasant, unhurried talk that sometimes happens between strangers who know they'll never see each other again. Patricia learned about Harold's retirement from teaching high school science, about June's volunteer work at their local library, about their son, the pediatrician, and his architect wife. In turn, she shared simple facts about her life, her home in Virginia, her late husband who had been gone now for almost 15 years, her love of gardening and history books. What she didn't mention was her 30-year military career, the medals in a box in her attic, or why the young pilots now flying this commercial jet would recognize her call sign from their training days. As the drink service began, Patricia accepted her water with a thank you and returned to her book. The flight settled into the rhythm of all long flights, the quiet hum of the engines, the occasional announcement from the cockpit, the subtle shifts of the aircraft as it rode the air currents eastward. To most of the passengers around her, Patricia Miller was just another elderly traveler in seat 20D, perhaps a grandmother, perhaps a retiree, certainly no one remarkable, just a passenger with a paperback book and a small carry-on, flying to San Diego like any other Tuesday. 3 hours into the flight, Patricia was deep into her book, occasionally sipping water from the plastic cup balanced carefully on her tray table. The steady hum of the engines had become background noise, the kind of sound that passengers stopped noticing after the first hour. The flight attendants had completed their meal. Service, a forgettable sandwich that Patricia had eaten, more out of habit than hunger, and the cabin had settled into the drowsy middle hours of cross-country travel. Harold and June had both dozed off, his head tilted back against the seat, her cheek resting on a small travel pillow propped against the window. Across the aisle, the young woman with headphones was watching a movie, her screen occasionally catching Patricia's eye with flashes of action. The first hint that something was changing came as a subtle vibration through the floor. Patricia felt it before most passengers noticed anything at all. Her feet, flat on the floor, registered the change in the aircraft's movement. She glanced up from her book, attention shifting immediately from the story to her surroundings. The seatbelt sign dinged on. A moment later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, this is your captain speaking. We're expecting some turbulence ahead, so I've turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please return to your seats if you're up and about and make sure your seatbelts are securely fastened." His voice was calm, professional, but Patricia caught the undertone. This wasn't just routine caution. She closed her book and placed it in the seat pocket, then checked her seatbelt, which was already fastened. Old habits. The first real jolt came about 2 minutes later. The plane dropped suddenly, then bounced back up, enough to wake Harold beside her. He blinked in confusion as a chorus of startled yelps sounded throughout the cabin. "Just some turbulence," Patricia told him quietly. "Captain warned us a minute ago." Harold nodded, reaching over to wake June gently as the plane shuddered again. This time the movement was more pronounced, a sharp lateral shake followed by another drop. Across the aisle, the young woman pulled off her headphones, eyes wide. "Is this normal?" she asked Patricia, noticing her calm demeanor. "Perfectly normal," Patricia assured her.
"Aircraft are built to handle much worse than this."
"Just keep your seatbelt fastened." The young woman nodded, tightening her seatbelt. Her knuckles were white against the armrests. The next few minutes brought increasingly violent motion. The aircraft pitched and rolled, dropping in pockets of unstable air before rising sharply again. Overhead, bins rattled. Somewhere behind them, a bag that hadn't been properly secured tumbled out, landing with a thud in the aisle. Throughout the cabin, reactions varied. Some passengers white-knuckled their armrests in silence. Others couldn't help but vocalize their fear. Sharp intakes of breath, muttered prayers, even a few scattered screams during the worst drops. A baby started crying several rows ahead, its wails rising above the general commotion. Through it all, Patricia sat still, her body moving with the plane rather than fighting against it. Her hands rested lightly on the armrests, not gripping them. Her breathing remained even, her expression calm. She'd experienced far worse turbulence in aircraft half this size, over mountain ranges and war zones, in storms that made this look like a gentle rocking. A flight attendant making her way down the aisle stumbled as the plane lurched sharply to the right. She grabbed the back of a seat to steady herself, but as the aircraft pitched again, she lost her balance and nearly fell into the lap of a passenger. Patricia's hand shot out, catching the woman's arm with surprising strength and steadiness. "Plant your feet wider," she said, quietly but clearly. "Bend your knees slightly. Move with the aircraft, not against it." The flight attendant, a woman in her 20s with a name tag reading Allison, looked startled at both the assistance and the advice. But she followed the instructions, adjusting her stance as Patricia suggested. When the next jolt came, she remained upright. "Thanks," she said, giving Patricia a curious look. "That's actually really helpful." "No problem," Patricia replied. "Used to do a lot of flying in rough weather myself." Before Allison could ask more, a particularly violent shake sent her grabbing for the nearest seat again. She continued down the aisle, checking on passengers but now using the technique Patricia had shared. The plane dropped suddenly, enough to cause weightlessness for a heart-stopping second. Gasps and cries filled the cabin. A plastic cup flew up from someone's tray table, spilling water across the ceiling before falling back down. The baby's cries turned to screams. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came through again, noticeably more tense this time. "We're experiencing some stronger turbulence than anticipated. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, please suspend service and secure the cabin." June grabbed Harold's hand, her face pale. "I hate this part," she whispered. Harold patted her hand reassuringly, though his own face showed concern. Across the aisle, the young woman had closed her eyes, lips moving silently. When she opened them and saw Patricia still sitting calmly, she asked, "How are you so calm?" "This is terrifying." Patricia smiled slightly. "I've been through worse," she said simply. Then, seeing the genuine fear in the young woman's eyes, she added, "Try taking deep breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Count to 4 on each inhale and exhale." The woman tried it, her breathing gradually becoming more regular despite the continued pitching of the aircraft. "I'm Patricia," Patricia offered. "Audrey," the woman replied between controlled breaths. "Nice to meet you, Audrey. Where are you headed in San Diego?" The simple question seemed to surprise Audrey, but it gave her something to focus on besides the turbulence. "My brother's getting married this weekend. I'm a bridesmaid." "That sounds lovely," Patricia said, as if they were chatting at a cafe rather than in a violently shaking airplane. "First time being in a wedding?" Their conversation continued through the worst of the turbulence, Patricia's calm questions and genuine interest providing Audrey with a welcome distraction. Nearby passengers couldn't help but notice the elderly woman's remarkable composure, some drawing visible comfort from it. If this grandmother wasn't worried, perhaps things weren't so dire after all. The lead flight attendant, a tall woman with short gray hair and a name tag reading Diane, had been watching from the front of the cabin. She'd noticed Patricia steadying Allison earlier and had observed her calm demeanor throughout the turbulence. Now, making her way carefully down the aisle to check on passengers, she paused beside row 20. "Everyone doing all right here?" she asked, her professional smile firmly in place despite the continued shaking of the aircraft. "We're fine, thank you," Patricia answered before her seatmates could respond. "How's the flight deck doing? Getting any reports on how long this patch might last?" The question wasn't unusual, but the phrasing caught Diane's attention. Most passengers would ask about the pilots or the cockpit, not the flight deck. And few would think to ask about reports regarding the turbulence duration. "They're handling it well," Diane replied, studying Patricia more carefully. "Weather radar shows we should be through the worst of it in about 10 minutes. Patricia nodded. "That's good news." Another sharp drop interrupted them, this one severe enough to make even Diane grab the seat back. Patricia remained steady. "You fly a lot?" Diane asked when the plane leveled out again. "Used to," Patricia said. "Not so much anymore." Something about her tone prompted Diane to ask, "Military?" Patricia gave a small nod but didn't elaborate. The plane shuddered again and Diane moved on to check other passengers. But she glanced back at Patricia several times during the next few minutes, her expression thoughtful. Gradually, the turbulence began to ease. The violent pitching gave way to gentler rocking and finally to just occasional bumps. The collective tension in the cabin slowly dissipated, replaced by nervous laughter and resumed conversations. The baby's cries subsided to hiccups. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice returned, notably more relaxed, "we've passed through the worst of the turbulence. I'll keep the seatbelt sign on for a while longer as we may experience some mild chop, but the worst is behind us. I appreciate your patience and the flight attendants will resume service shortly." Harold let out a long breath. "Well, that was more excitement than I was hoping for on this flight." June nodded, her color slowly returning. "I always hate turbulence. Makes me feel so helpless." "You did great," Patricia assured her. Across the aisle, Audrey was visibly relieved. "Thank you," she said to Patricia. "Talking really helped. I usually panic during turbulence." "Happy to help," Patricia replied. As the flight settled back into its rhythm, Patricia returned to her book, but she noticed Diane watching her from the galley area, speaking quietly to Allison and gesturing subtly toward row 20. Both flight attendants looked at her with curiosity now, clearly discussing the passenger who had remained so unusually calm during the severe turbulence. The flight had returned to normalcy, or as close to it as possible at 36,000 feet. The beverage service resumed, passengers returned to their movies and books, and the steady drone of the engines once again faded into background noise. Patricia had gone back to her novel, though she found her mind wandering from the story more often than not. The turbulence had awakened old instincts, bringing back memories of flights where staying calm wasn't just a personal choice but a professional responsibility. Harold and June had both dozed off again, making up for sleep loss during the rough air. Across the aisle, Audrey had returned to her movie, though she'd removed one earbud and occasionally glanced Patricia's way with a small smile of lingering gratitude. Patricia was just considering whether to join her seatmates in a nap when the captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time with a different kind of tension in it. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Wilson speaking. I need to ask if there are any medical professionals on board today. If you're a doctor, nurse, EMT, or have other medical training, please press your call button now." Patricia's hand moved to the button before the announcement was even complete, an automatic response honed by years of similar calls. But she paused, her finger hovering just above it. She'd been retired for nearly a decade. There were likely more recently trained medical professionals on board. Her hesitation lasted only seconds before she pressed the button firmly. Throughout the cabin, a handful of other call buttons lit up. Patricia counted 4, including hers. Not many for a full flight, but not unusual either. Diane, the lead flight attendant, appeared at the front of the cabin. She spoke quietly with another crew member, then began making her way down the aisle, stopping at each lit call button to speak with the passenger. When she reached row 20, recognition flashed across her face. "You have medical training?" she asked Patricia, voice low enough not to wake the sleeping couple beside her. "Yes," Patricia replied simply. "Flight surgeon. Retired now, but the training sticks." Diane's eyes widened slightly. "Flight surgeon? Military?" Patricia nodded once. "We have a situation in first class," Diane explained, her professional demeanor not quite masking her concern. "Passenger showing signs of a possible heart attack. We've got the emergency medical kit out, but..." She hesitated. "The other volunteers are a dental hygienist and a veterinarian." "Lead the way," Patricia said without hesitation, unbuckling her seatbelt and standing. She was shorter than many would expect, just 5'4", but she moved with decisive purpose that made her seem larger. Diane guided her to the front of the plane. As they passed through the curtain separating first class from the main cabin, Patricia immediately assessed the scene. A man in his 60s was slumped in his seat, his complexion ashen, his breathing labored. A younger flight attendant, Allison, who Patricia had steadied during the turbulence, stood nearby, holding the plane's emergency medical kit with uncertainty written across her face. 2 other passengers stood awkwardly in the aisle. One, a woman in her 30s, introduced herself as the dental hygienist. The other, a man probably in his 50s, identified himself as a veterinarian. Both looked relieved when Patricia stepped forward. "I'm Patricia," she said simply, "former flight surgeon." "Sir?" She addressed the ill passenger directly, her voice shifting to a calm, authoritative tone that somehow managed to be gentle at the same time. "I'm here to help you. Can you tell me your name?" "Robert," the man managed, his voice strained. "Robert Keller. Mr. Keller, can you tell me where the pain is?" Patricia was already reaching for his wrist, her fingers finding his pulse with practiced ease. "My chest," he gasped, "like something's sitting on it. Started about 10 minutes ago." Patricia nodded, counting his pulse, rapid and irregular. "Any pain in your left arm?" "Jaw back?" "Arm," he confirmed. "Left arm feel strange, heavy." Patricia turned to Diane. "Has the captain been advised of the situation?" "Yes, he's aware. He's asked if we need to divert." "We'll make that determination shortly," Patricia said, her focus returning to the patient. "Mr. Keller, do you have any history of heart problems?" As Robert described his medical history, including a stent placed 3 years earlier, Patricia continued her assessment. She checked his breathing, had him describe his symptoms in more detail, and asked about medications. "Allison." Patricia turned to the younger flight attendant. "In that kit, there should be a blood pressure cuff and a stethoscope. Could you hand them to me, please?" Allison quickly found the items, and Patricia took Robert's blood pressure. Her movements were economical, practiced, betraying years of similar assessments conducted in far more challenging environments than the relative comfort of an airliner's first-class cabin. "Mr. Keller," she said after completing her check, "I believe you're experiencing a cardiac event. It could be angina or it could be a heart attack. Either way, we need to take immediate action." She turned to Diane. "Is there aspirin in the medical kit?" Diane checked quickly. "Yes, right here." "Good. Mr. Keller, are you allergic to aspirin?" When he shook his head, Patricia continued, "I recommend you chew 1 adult aspirin immediately. It can help reduce the damage to your heart. As Robert took the aspirin, Patricia addressed Diane again. I need to speak with the captain. Based on Mr. Keller's symptoms and vital signs, I believe we should divert to the nearest suitable airport with appropriate medical facilities. The veterinarian spoke up.
I agree.
These symptoms in any mammal would warrant immediate intervention. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Patricia's lip twitched slightly at the comment. She turned to Diane. Let's use the interphone to contact the flight deck. Diane led Patricia to the galley where she picked up the interphone and spoke briefly with the cockpit. After explaining that a passenger with medical training wanted to speak with them, she handed the phone to Patricia. This is Captain Wilson. I understand we have a medical situation. Who am I speaking with? Captain, this is Patricia Miller. I'm a retired flight surgeon with 30 years' experience in aeromedical evacuation. We have a male passenger, mid-60s, presenting with classic symptoms of myocardial infarction. Chest pain, left arm pain, shortness of breath, diaphoresis. Pulse is rapid and irregular. Blood pressure is elevated at 164/95. I've administered aspirin, but I strongly recommend diverting to the nearest appropriate facility. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. When the captain spoke again, his voice had changed subtly, as if he was speaking to a colleague rather than a passenger. Understood, Doctor. We're currently over eastern Colorado. Denver would be our closest major medical center, about 15 minutes away. Would that be your recommendation? Denver would be excellent, Captain. Their cardiac center is top-notch. Roger that. We'll begin our descent immediately. Do you need any additional medical equipment? We have supplemental oxygen available. Yes, oxygen would be beneficial. And if you could have ground medical services standing by with a full cardiac response team, that would be ideal. Will do, Doctor. We'll keep this line open if you need anything further. Patricia handed the phone back to Diane. They're diverting to Denver. Let's get oxygen started for Mr. Keller, and I'll continue monitoring his condition. The next several minutes were a flurry of focused activity. Patricia returned to Robert's side, explaining what was happening and continuing to monitor his vital signs. Allison set up the oxygen, following Patricia's precise instructions. The dental hygienist and veterinarian helped as needed, but clearly deferred to Patricia's expertise. The captain's announcement came moments later, informing passengers of the medical emergency and the diversion to Denver. A collective murmur went through the cabin, but the overall response was understanding. Patricia was vaguely aware of Diane explaining the situation to anxious passengers, but her attention remained fixed on her patient. Mr. Keller, we're going to land in Denver in about 15 minutes, she told him, her voice calm and reassuring. There will be medical professionals waiting to take care of you as soon as we're on the ground. I'm going to stay right here with you until they arrive. Robert nodded weakly, his breathing somewhat easier with the oxygen, but his face still gray with pain. Thank you, he managed. Are you a doctor? I was a flight surgeon, Patricia explained, checking his pulse again. Spent most of my career taking care of people in the air. Military? He asked between labored breaths. Patricia nodded. Air Force, long time ago now. My son, Air Force too, pilot. Is that right? Patricia said with a small smile, adjusting the oxygen flow slightly. What does he fly? The conversation continued gently as the plane began its descent, Patricia keeping Robert engaged while continuously monitoring his condition. She knew that keeping him conscious and talking was important, both for assessment and for keeping panic at bay. As the aircraft approached Denver, the captain's voice came over the interphone again, this time asking to speak directly with Patricia. Diane held the phone for her so she could keep one hand on Robert's wrist, monitoring his pulse. The aircraft descended toward Denver International Airport with priority clearance from air traffic control. Inside the cabin, most passengers remained unaware of the full gravity of the situation unfolding in first class, knowing only that a medical emergency had forced the unscheduled landing. Flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin, ensuring everything was secure for the unexpected approach. In first class, Patricia maintained her steady focus on Robert, checking his pulse regularly and adjusting his oxygen as needed. Though his condition remained serious, her calm presence seemed to steady him. His breathing had become slightly less labored, but the pain in his chest continued. Almost there, Patricia assured him. Just a few more minutes, Allison appeared with a blanket. He seemed cold, she explained, handing it to Patricia. Good observation, Patricia replied, carefully tucking the blanket around Robert. Keeping him warm helps prevent shock. From the cockpit came the sound of rapid communication with Denver's air traffic control. The voices were professionally controlled but carried the unmistakable tension of an emergency landing. Patricia listened with half an ear, her attention primarily on her patient, but her experienced mind automatically processed the flight crew's actions and preparations. Prepare for landing, came the announcement over the intercom. Cabin crew, secure the cabin. The descent steepened slightly and Patricia placed a steadying hand on Robert's shoulder. We're going to land in just a moment, she told him. There might be a bump or two, but I'm right here with you. He nodded weakly, eyes clouded with pain but still alert. Thank you, Colonel, he managed. The touchdown was smoother than many routine landings, a testament to the skill of the flight crew. As soon as the aircraft had slowed sufficiently, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we've landed safely in Denver. We'll be taxiing directly to a gate where medical personnel are standing by. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until we've come to a complete stop at the gate. I repeat, it is essential that everyone remain seated to allow medical personnel quick access to our passenger in need. The taxiing took less than 2 minutes. Through the windows, Patricia could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles waiting on the tarmac. As soon as the aircraft doors opened, a team of paramedics boarded efficiently, equipment in hand. What have we got? The lead paramedic asked, moving directly to Robert's side. 67-year-old male presenting with acute chest pain, left arm pain, diaphoresis, and shortness of breath. Patricia reported crisply. History of cardiac stent placement 3 years ago. Current medications include atorvastatin and lisinopril. Pain began approximately 40 minutes ago. Described as crushing pressure. Patient was given 325 milligrams of aspirin and supplemental oxygen at 6 liters per minute. Pulse is irregular. Blood pressure last measured at 158/92. The paramedic glanced at Patricia, clearly not expecting such a thorough and professional report from a fellow passenger. Are you a doctor? Former flight surgeon, she replied simply. Colonel Patricia Miller, retired. The paramedic nodded, turning his attention to Robert. Mr. Keller, we're going to take good care of you. We're transferring you to University Hospital. They have an excellent cardiac team standing by. As the paramedics worked to transfer Robert onto a stretcher, one of them asked Patricia, would you mind writing down your assessment for our report? The hospital will want the details of care provided during the flight. Of course. Patricia took the clipboard offered and quickly wrote down her observations and the care she'd provided, signing it with her name and former rank. When she handed it back, the paramedic glanced at the signature, then looked at her more closely. Miller. Colonel Patricia Miller. Were you with the 59th Medical Wing? Yes, Patricia confirmed, surprised. A long time ago now. The paramedic's expression changed. Ma'am, my brother served in Afghanistan. He was wounded in an ambush near Kandahar in 2008. Evac flight brought him out under heavy fire. He always talked about the flight surgeon on board, a colonel who kept him alive despite taking shrapnel herself. Said her call sign was Nightingale. Patricia's face remained composed, but her eyes revealed recognition. There were many brave medical personnel serving in Afghanistan, she said quietly. Yes, ma'am, there were, the paramedic agreed, a new respect in his voice. But only one Nightingale. The moment was interrupted as the team finished securing Robert to the stretcher. We need to move, the lead paramedic announced. Thank you, Robert said weakly, reaching for Patricia's hand. She squeezed it gently. You're in excellent hands now. Take care of yourself, Mr. Keller. As the medical team carefully maneuvered the stretcher toward the exit, the lead paramedic turned back to Patricia. Ma'am, if you're staying in Denver, University Hospital would consider it an honor if you'd visit. Several of our staff served in military medical units. I appreciate the invitation, Patricia replied, but I expect we'll be continuing on to San Diego once the aircraft is cleared. The paramedic nodded his understanding and followed his team off the plane. Patricia watched them go, then turned to find Diane standing nearby, having witnessed the entire exchange. Colonel, Diane said, using the rank with visible respect. The captain would like to speak with you if you don't mind. He's asked if you could come to the flight deck. Patricia nodded, following Diane toward the cockpit. As they passed through the main cabin, Patricia noticed the curious glances from passengers, including Harold and June, who looked confused to see their roommate now apparently involved in the emergency response. Audrey caught her eye from across the aisle and gave a small wave, which Patricia returned with a smile. It was clear that word was spreading through the cabin. The elderly woman from seat 20D was somehow more than she had seemed. The cockpit door was open when they arrived. Inside, the captain and first officer were completing post-landing procedures, but both looked up as Patricia appeared in the doorway. Captain Wilson was younger than Patricia had expected, probably in his mid-40s. He stood immediately, something pilots rarely did while in their seat on the flight deck. "Colonel Miller," he said, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you personally for your assistance today. Your expertise quite possibly saved Mr. Keller's life." "Just doing what anyone with training would do," Patricia replied, shaking his hand. The first officer, a woman perhaps in her 30s, was looking at Patricia with an expression of dawning recognition. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said hesitantly, "but when the captain mentioned your call sign—" "Are you the Nightingale?" "The one who pioneered the CCAT protocols for high-risk aeromedical evacuations in Afghanistan and Iraq." Patricia inclined her head slightly, neither confirming nor denying. "Because if you are," the first officer continued, her professional demeanor momentarily giving way to something like awe, "we studied your protocols at the academy. Your work revolutionized battlefield medevac. You're practically a legend in military aviation medicine." "That was a different lifetime," Patricia said quietly, "and it was a team effort. Many brave men and women contributed to those advances." "Yes, ma'am." The first officer nodded, "but from what I learned, you were the driving force. Your call sign is still taught as an example of leadership under fire." Captain Wilson was studying Patricia with new understanding. "I flew C-17s before joining the airlines," he explained. "Transported wounded soldiers from Bagram to Germany many times. I never had the honor of flying with you, ma'am, but your reputation certainly preceded you." The medevac teams all knew Nightingale. Patricia looked slightly uncomfortable with the recognition but maintained her composure. "That was many years ago, Captain. Today I'm just grateful we were able to get Mr. Keller the care he needed." "Of course," the captain nodded. "I've been informed that we'll be cleared to continue to San Diego in approximately 45 minutes. Ground crews are refueling now and we're filing an updated flight plan." "Thank you for the update," Patricia said, preparing to return to the cabin. "Colonel," the captain added, "would you mind if I made an announcement to the passengers about your assistance today? I think they would appreciate knowing they had someone of your caliber helping in the emergency." Patricia shook her head firmly. "I'd prefer to avoid any special attention, Captain. There's no need for announcements. I'm just another passenger trying to get to San Diego." The captain looked like he might protest, but something in Patricia's expression stopped him. "As you wish, ma'am. But please know that my crew and I are honored to have you aboard." Patricia thanked him and turned to leave the flight deck. As she did, she noticed that both pilots had subtly straightened their posture in a way that suggested professional respect, the kind reserved for someone whose reputation had earned special regard. Back in the main cabin, Diane escorted Patricia toward her seat. "We'll be on the ground for about 45 minutes, she explained. "Passengers are allowed to use the lavatories, but we're asking everyone to remain on board.